Good morning. It's exactly 10 o'clock, so I can think we can start. According to this webinar on the European education area and more specifically on the Teacher Academies, which is a call under the Erasmus Plus program. Before we start and I give the floor to our speaker, Mrs. Säävälä, I will introduce myself and I will give you some house rules. My name is Gegeven and I'm working for the VLEVA, the Flemish European Liaison Offices, as a liaison officer, European grants and financing. Normally my colleague Ute would present this webinar, but she organized it, but unfortunately she couldn't be here today. So some practical things. You are all unmuted and your videos are turned off by us, so we cannot see or hear you. However, you have the possibility to ask your questions in the question box, which you can find in the control panel. We will collect all these questions, and after the presentation of Mr. Säävälä, we have some time for a Q&A. Don't forget to mention your organization when you have a question. By next week, you will receive an email with the recordings of this webinar and the presentation of Mr. Säävälä. And then I can introduce Mr. Säävälä himself. Thank you for being here. Mrs. Tapio Säävälä has been working in the field of education since 1985 already, and he started his career as a special needs education teacher, worked as a school headmaster, and also as senior advisor in the National Board of Education in Finland. He joined the European Commission in 2002 to work for the lifelong learning policies and key competencies in particular. He also worked for EASEA, which is the executive agency for the Erasmus Plus program, and currently he's working as a policy officer on teachers and teacher education policies at the Commission. So I think the right person on the right place for this webinar. Mr. Säävälä, the digital floors is all yours, and I wish you all an interesting presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here and explain to you this idea of Erasmus Plus Teacher Academies, which is part of the European education area. And I think that this event is also quite timely, because the call for proposals is just being published, and I will come back to this later. But today I will focus on the policy background of this initiative and the key features of this initiative, because the executive agency, as was mentioned by the introduction, will be organizing another information session later on, probably in the spring next year, to explain all the details on how to apply, what are the financial rules, etc., etc. So I will start with the European education area. If my slides, okay, you see the slides now, it was a bit stuck. The European education area is a very broad initiative that is actually replacing the previous Education and Training 2020 program, and it has quite a big coverage, and it was very clearly explained in the communication that we published last year in September in 2020. And it has 6 different dimensions. The first is quality in education and training, and here you can see the idea of boosting basic skills and transversal skills, the key competencies, etc., and the lifelong learning idea, and the European perspective in education. The second dimension is about inclusion and gender equality, and here we have also quite a lot of, let's say, different issues, first of all, but also some initiatives that we are launching. It goes without saying that these green and digital transitions are very topical issues, and there again there will be quite a lot of initiatives. Mostly on the digital side, we have published this Digital Education Action Plan also last year, which is a very comprehensive package of promoting digital education, digital teaching, and digital learning in Europe. But you will also see that there is the fourth dimension is indeed about teachers and trainers. And this is, of course, because of the fact that without teachers and trainers' commitment and their competencies, no reform can succeed. And it is also the very basic fact that most of the investment, more than 60% of investment in education goes to teachers. So they are, of course, in the whole package of the education area, teachers and trainers are the cornerstone. The fifth dimension is about higher education, and the sixth about geopolitical dimension of European collaboration with other countries and international dimension of Erasmus+. But I will now focus on this teachers and trainers dimension of this initiative. And indeed, we have quite a lot of initiatives on this. I will today focus on this Erasmus+ Teacher Academies, but we have also some other ideas and work going on that I will explain to you later. So what is then the vision of the European education area on teachers? And it is no surprise that it is a kind of continuum starting from high quality initial education, effective induction, and continuous professional development throughout the careers. But we also have this idea of enhancing participation in professional networks and communities. E-twinning is, of course, a good example of this, and also benefiting from learning mobility abroad. This induction, by the way, for instance, it is shown in the latest Europese report on teachers that only some half of European teachers are benefiting from induction. So this is again something that is very important to look into in the international policies. But this is the vision, and all the actions are actually building on this vision. And you can see that we really hope that teachers are lifelong learners and they are supported by different actions that are relevant for their career development. So then we have quite a lot of challenges, and the first one is, of course, the shortages of teachers. And these figures are, by the way, from the Education and Training Monitor, which is then building on Tali's 2018 survey, the OECD survey. And there, 25% of principals declare that there are some kind of shortages of teachers, qualified teachers. And sometimes it's across the board. But what is more worrying is actually that there are shortages of teachers teaching students with special needs. That was my profession in the past, and also teaching students in multicultural and multilingual settings, and students coming from disadvantaged environments and homes. And now, if you think of this very idea of promoting inclusion within the European education area, this is of course very worrying news. Another issue is quite well known and affects most of the European countries, which is that the teaching workforce is aging. Most of them, or let's say a big portion of them, are over 50, so there will be quite a lot of teachers retiring in the next decade. Well, if I was staying in the profession of teaching, I would certainly be in this category as well. But then there is also the issue of dropping out from teaching profession. So young people start, but after a few years they leave schools and leave teaching for many reasons. But this is not only about shortages. In some countries there are also oversupply of teachers. And this is also quite well described if you want to have more details in this Europese report on teaching careers in Europe. So it is quite a big challenge for policymakers to get this right, this supply and demand of teachers of different kinds. Another big issue is this image of teachers, how teachers feel that their profession is valued. And this, again, this OECD Tali survey reveals that only 1 in 5 approximately of lower secondary teachers in Europe feel that their profession is valued. So this is of course something that if teachers themselves do not feel that they are valued, how can then they tell their students or other young people to become teachers later on? The well-known fact is of course this gender imbalance. The proportion of female teachers reaches 85% in primary education, and also in secondary there are more than 60% of teachers that are female. This CPD is also very interesting because it seems that most of the teachers participate in further learning, but it is indeed those areas that I mentioned earlier where teachers shortages also exist, where practicing teachers would like to get more training and more opportunities to develop their competencies, especially with the special needs, but also in ICT for teaching, and indeed with these multilingual and multicultural environments. And this CPD is also, it is a very interesting area because it's also a question, at least for me, that how are these teachers' learning needs defined? By whom, and what is the way of defining them? Are they, let's say, individual needs for, let's say, improving competencies in subject pedagogies or subject knowledge, or are they then more collective needs of the schools as learning community? And again, if you look at those areas like students with special needs and the promotion of inclusion, a very good question is that how the competencies of the school as a learning community can be enhanced by CPD if the needs are actually rather collective. Do you go and take training outside the school? Do you bring trainers in the school or coaches in the school? Do you organize peer learning within the school community, etc., etc.? So this is very, very interesting question, and unfortunately, we don't have a very clear picture on how this is organized at the moment, because the Tally survey, for instance, is from 2018, and it is by definition before the pandemic, which is one of the issues in this context. And this leads, of course, to the idea of digital competencies, and what we know is that before pandemic, at least only 6 EU member states had a framework of digital competencies nationally. And in some countries, more countries, digital competencies were included in general teacher competencies frameworks. But before, and this is again before the pandemic, only 40% of teachers felt well prepared. Of course, now the situation is much better because the consultation on the digital education action plan, for instance, indicates that 60% of teachers felt that they had improved their digital skills during the crisis, which is of course evident. And the motivation of enhancing digital skills by teachers was of course growing because of the pandemic. One thing that is very close to the heart of the European education area and what the Erasmus Plus is actively promoting is the teachers' learning mobility. And the fact is that in 2018, something like 40% of teachers had been abroad during their careers, and there was an increase compared to Tally's 2013. Here we need to keep in mind that in 2013 and 2014, we have 17 countries that participated in both surveys. So the 16% increase is related to these 17 countries. But I think that in overall, we can say that before the pandemic, learning mobility was growing, was increasing in Europe. And then the pandemic came and, let's say, disturbed this very drastically. It is also true that only 1 in 5 went abroad during their initial education, but the good news is, and this is again from the Eurydice report, that it seems that those teachers that had mobility opportunities during their studies are much more likely to take mobilities also later in their career. So the experience has been positive, and it is felt that by those teachers that it is part of the professional development to go abroad and learn from other countries. The majority of teachers going abroad for learning mobility are, of course, language teachers, following science and math teachers, and very often they go to accompany students, but also learning for learning languages and studying. Teaching is less frequent, as you see, something like 30% goes for teaching, and of course there are quite a lot of issues. It may be a question of languages, it may be a question of, let's say, other, let's say, administrative issues that are not favorable to this. We know the benefits of learning mobility, but there are also quite a lot of obstacles. And we are planning at the Commission to create a policy framework later on to look at these issues and to create a framework that would look into enabling mobility to be more commonplace in Europe. So we can then come back to this idea of Erasmus Plus Teacher Academies, and indeed, this is a new action in the Erasmus Plus program. We have the first round now under evaluation, and we just published the 2022 call, which is now out, and you can have a closer look at it. I will give you the links later on. But the very idea of this teacher academies is actually to create networks of initial teacher education and continuous professional development providers with other relevant stakeholders to create projects. And you can see here that if the idea of the European education area was the continuum and lifelong learning aspect of teachers and teaching careers, here we try to bring together all those actors that can enable this continuum, this lifelong learning idea and this career-long development for teachers. So this is one of the key ideas of the Erasmus Plus Teacher Academies, and the other is, of course, that they collaborate and work together on EU priorities such as digital learning, sustainability, equity and inclusion, and other priorities that they may find useful and linked to this idea of teacher academies. But what is also important is that they will organize joint learning offer with a strong European dimension, and this can take the form of, let's say, joint courses, mobilities, summer camps, whatever, virtual, hybrid, on-site teaching and learning opportunities that are jointly created by those participating organizations. But it is also very important that it is something that is well structured and it is well recognized and it is quality assured. I will come back to that also later. And we indeed expect these teacher academies to organize and develop learning mobility. They could also look at those issues that are, let's say, today obstacles for good learning mobility, and look at those issues that would make mobility more commonplace and more successful, and as a kind of integral part of teachers' learning process. And since these are supposed to be rather large projects and long-lasting projects, we of course expect them that at least in the longer run, they can contribute to the policy development and create sustainable collaborative networks. So what would be the benefits then of teacher academies, Erasmus Plus Teacher Academies? For the teacher education providers, of course, they can through this collaboration, they can enhance their collaboration with other countries and enhance their European dimension. And indeed, this career-long perspective, because if they collaborate with those that are focusing on initial and those that are more for CPD, for instance, that this collaboration enables them to offer more career-long perspective to their learning offer. And again, you know, if these organizations are working together, they could organize mobility schemes in more effective way. And indeed, in the longer run, if the partnership is strong and policymakers are involved, they can have an impact on policies. And those students and teachers that participate in these projects, either as part of the learning offer or otherwise, of course, they will get a unique perspective to European education systems, which usually is very much appreciated if you interview those that have taken part in mobility. But as I said before, it is also very important that these learning opportunities are tailored, they are relevant for those, they are quality assured and recognized. So this recognition is again one of the key issues here, so that they can really benefit also career-wise from their experiences abroad or experience in participating in these kind of projects. And again, in longer run, these peer learning and professional communities like eTwinning and other communities that can be created by these projects will be very beneficial. And this is again something that comes also out from Tallis survey, that teachers themselves seem to appreciate learning through professional communities and learning with their colleagues, learning together. So again, this is something that should be promoted by policies, and it is one of the ideas of the teacher academies to promote. And of course, those policymakers that take part will get the first-hand experiences on what works well in teacher education. And again, they will get experiences on the career-long perspective, because all those actors together can give good advice to policies. I will also highlight some of the related initiatives that you can also see as priorities in this Erasmus Plus Teacher Academies, but also we have some other, let's say, ways of working on these very, very topical issues that are common for most of the European countries, or if not all. First of all, we just got a Council recommendation on blended learning. And this has a long history, because already during the pandemic, we were working very closely with member states. And then we published an informal, let's say, document or report on how blended learning could be organized. And this now then was expanded to this Council recommendation, which is now out. And it is good to know here that even if this recommendation or this work on blended learning started with this pandemic and school closures and the sudden move to distance learning, forced move to distance learning, this is broader. This also looks at not only the tools that are used like digital tools or distance learning tools, but also learning environments in more broadly. So, for instance, expanding learning environments to museums, to sports facilities, etc., etc. So I think that, you know, it's probably fair to say that if there is anything good from deriving from this pandemic and the crisis, on top of resilience, indeed, that this idea of blending learning and making it more flexible may be something that we can build on, and this recommendation is indeed trying to do this as well. Another initiative that relates very much to the appreciation of teaching professions and making it more attractive is this European Innovative Teaching Award that was launched this year for the first time. And this is something that looks at Erasmus Plus projects, and it has 4 categories starting from primary to vocational training. And we have had a launch event, we have had a ceremony. There are actually more than 100 projects awarded this year. And just a little publicity, if you click this picture later on when you get the slides, there will be a link to the 4th European Education Summit, where the highlights of this teaching award will be also presented. And then we also published it was in October actually, this Selfie for teachers. And this is a tool that helps teachers to identify their digital competencies and look at those areas that they would need to develop further. And this is, of course, building on the previous work of Selfie for schools that was more broadly looking at digital maturity of schools. So this is also available, and if you click this link, this picture, you will find more information on this, and I encourage you to take this test by yourself. It may be revealing. There will be also a proposal for a council recommendation on education for environmental sustainability, which will be coming soon. And a very important initiative linked to the inclusion and equity will be these pathways for school success for all. This is also a proposal for a council recommendation that we are going to publish. And some of you may remember that 2011 there was a council recommendation on reducing or preventing early school leaving, and that was in the way having these policy areas like that, creating monitoring, creating systems for prevention, creating actions for intervention, and then finally compensation if early school leaving had happened. And this very, let's say, important 4 steps will be also part of this Pathways initiative. That will on top focus on basic skills, of course, but also on well-being and reducing, or let's say avoiding bullying and well-being of both students and teachers in school to make them more conducive to create successful conditions for everyone to succeed. Finally, there is this work that we have started on developing European guidelines for national career frameworks. And here the idea is to look at different things that teachers could do, what are they could do during their careers, moving towards not only to leadership positions, but becoming experts in their subject areas or in other areas in their school community. And the idea here is indeed that if we make teaching careers more diverse, and if teachers and young people considering to become teachers are aware that it is not a long train from start till the very end without any options in the meantime, I think that, you know, then they might be more interested in becoming teachers. But the challenge is, of course, that first of all, we need to have those opportunities, and we need to make them more visible when they exist. So all these areas, as you can see, are somehow linked to teachers and teachers' teaching professions, and the role of teachers here are key. And of course, these are also the priorities, more or less, that the teacher academies will work on. So synergies with these other works, other initiatives during the course of the project will be, of course, desirable. Okay, so then we can become a bit more practical. We need to keep in mind that the implementation of this Erasmus Plus Teacher Academies will be done by the European Education and Culture Executive Agency, this EACARE. And as I said, you are very timely following this presentation, because the call for proposals is for 2022 is out just now. You will find the link here also to the program guide where the details have been explained. And this annual work program is a bit more generic document, but you will also find interesting information on other actions that Erasmus Plus is offering for you. The indicative timeline, as you will see in the program guide, is that, okay, the program guide is now out. The deadline will be in September next year, and then we'll start the selection and selection process and the preparation of the award decision, and the contracts are likely to start at the beginning of 2023. But I emphasize that this is an indicative timetable, and I will encourage you to follow closely EAKEA's website because all the information is there. And they will also organize an information session later on with all this information and very, let's say, detailed information on how to apply, what are the funding rules, etc., etc. So please take this as an overview and an encouragement to follow closely this website. And finally, if I may use the word of homework, there is quite a lot of homework for you if you want to learn more about the policy background. This is, of course, voluntary homework for you. But we have a brochure. If you click this picture here, you will have a short, let's say, brochure on Teacher Academies. But I also encourage you to look at these communication on the European education area and the digital education action plan. There are council conclusions from the Croatian presidency from 2020 on European teachers and trainers. And indeed, this Eurydice report from 2021, the very recent one, is quite interesting, and you will find quite a lot of information and interesting details also related to your country in that. And the education and training monitors are full of information on teachers and issues and related to teachers and teaching professions. The TALIS surveys are, of course, the main source of information on top of the Eurostat data that we are using as well. And if you want to look at these teaching careers, there is a working group report available in the School Education Gateway. And finally, as I said before, the 4th European Education Summit will be on 9th of December this year, and it is broadcasted widely, so you can have a look at or you can view the web streaming of it. So with these words and homework, I thank you very much for your attention, and if there are any questions, I will do my best to provide you answers to those. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Säävälä. Thank you for all the information and the introduction on the Teacher Academies. We haven't received questions in the chat box during your presentation, but we received some on beforehand. If you still have any questions, you can still write them down in the chat box on the right side of your screen. So the first question is, will there be a special focus in this call, or will it be the same of the previous call?
The call is not, or the call has not changed a lot. But of course, by principle, I will ask you to read very carefully the current version of the call, because there are, of course, some changes, some fine tunings, and some more information. So please use always as a reference the current call. And those priorities I actually explained, but it is again something that if you read very carefully the text of the call, and then you start creating your own projects, you need to see how your circumstances, how your network, or how the group of organizations that are applying can look at those priorities. But I think that the priorities are very much following the priorities of current policy work that we are doing.
Okay, and will there be synergies with European universities?
This is a very good question. Indeed, the European Universities call for proposals was also published. I think that it was yesterday or day before yesterday. So you are very timely with this question. So, and there will be an information session on 14th of December, organized by this executive agency on this new call on European universities. And when we speak about synergies, synergies between different actions and activities and projects are of course welcome, but you have to be very careful that you are not duplicating, or you are not, let's say, that every project that your organization is taking part in will be clearly separate, and there's no doubt of duplicating, or let's say any ideas or any doubts of, let's say, double funding or anything like this. So you will be asked when you submit your proposal to declare very clearly on what are the other projects that you are taking part, to make it clear that everything is, let's say, that everything is clear and not, let's say, duplicating anything. So that is the synergies are good, but you have to be very careful on this topic.
Okay, we received some more questions. First question is there an emphasis on creating specialized qualifications?
There is, to my understanding, it has not been mentioned as a priority, but again, it is something that if you look at the policy background and then you adapt it into your own proposals and into your ideas, it is not excluding anything, but the point is that your proposal has to be following those, let's say, key priorities, and it has to be consistent and coherent. So it is up to the applicant, of course, to then propose the means of reaching those goals and objectives and the impact that is described in the call document.
Okay, and then a question about UK. Can they be partner of the future proposals, or are they excluded?
This is something that I need to verify, because the situation has been changing a bit, because in the previous program they were given the opportunity to continue till the very end. But let me just not to give any wrong answer. I will come back to you and verify with our legal experts.
And we can send the answers then in the report of this meeting. Then another question, is this also for teachers and students from secondary schools?
This is also a good question, because the focus of this call of proposal on teacher academies is on ISCET 1 to 3, which means primary, secondary, and the initial VET. And so all that provide education for teachers teaching in these areas of ISCET 1 to 3 are the target group. This is very clearly explained in the document.
Okay, thank you. And I see some more questions are coming. How many teacher academies does the Commission wants? So is there a number of teacher academies that they stated on beforehand?
The communication on the European education area announced a target that by 2025 we would have at least 25 teacher academies. So that is a kind of reference or benchmark that we are following.
Okay, and then I have still this question. Should there be a link between teacher education in primary and secondary schools, or can networks focus on one of them?
I don't think that there is any restriction on that, but I think that this is something that we can also check And these kind of questions are actually very good at the info session for that the executive agency is organizing. So I would leave that question to this info session if it is not clear when you read the document, because they are very important eligibility questions that you are now posing. And since it is the executive agency responsible for this call and the implementation of this call, I would leave it to their legal experts to give the exact answer to this type of questions. My role has been, to create the policy background for this call.
Okay, thank you. And one of the last questions I see here, is this also for teachers and students from secondary vocational schools?
The ISCET 3 includes initial vocational education and training. So in that sense, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But again, these are the agency will also organize a functional mailbox. So all of these, let's say, detailed questions, it is better that you write when the mailbox is open, you write a clear question to them, and you get a written answer, and that has been checked by the legal people. So then you are safe with your approach.
And there's also a question from West University. Can ETI students get ECTS credits as a recognition for this call?
Again, this is something that you need to include this as part of your proposal, or if you are unsure that whether this is the case, again, this is something that it's better to write to the executive agency and get the written answer.
Okay, then I think we have got all the questions so far. If there are still any questions coming up, you can send them to us and we will ask them to you, Mrs. Säävälä. I already said this presentation is recorded, so all participants will receive an email with the presentation and the recording of this webinar. So I think we can finish this webinar. I would like to thank you, Mr. Säävälä, for being here with us and for all the interesting information. Ute for organizing this webinar, and you all for being here and for your attention. We hope to see you at one of our VLEVA activities. And so far, I'm wishing you all the best, and of course, stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you also from my part, and please indeed follow the EAKEA website for all of these details later on. And if you apply, I wish you good luck, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.